Welcome in, welcome back, welcome to my stream of unconsciousness, where half the time even I don't know what I'm going to say. It being the spooky season, I thought we would do something a little different. In honor of Halloween, I'd like to share some of my own experiences and some of the stories I was told by family when I was growing up. I will say that for the family ghost stories, I'm going off what I was told and what I can remember. I'm no longer able to ask questions or verify details, as most of the people I could ask have unfortunately passed on. I'd like to start with my grandmother. My grandmother loved to tell ghost stories, loved the paranormal, although her generation would have recognized that word. One of the earliest stories I remember was about her ability as a young woman to remove warts. She would rub the affected area with her thumbs while concentrating on making the wart vanish, and in a few days or weeks the person would report that the wart had vanished. Unfortunately, while demonstrating this ability to someone, she was told that this power was evil and came from the devil. This upset and frightened her, and she was never able to do it again. The next few stories I remember fairly clearly, I believe happened in the same location. My grandparents and their children moved into a house in a small Texas town that was believed to be haunted, although I don't know that they were aware of that before they moved in. The story goes that a woman that had lived there a number of years prior had somehow caught or been set on fire. She had run through the house in pain and panic, only to finally fall and perish in her backyard. When my grandparents moved in, they noticed that the previous tenants had left lit cigarettes and candles on top of all the shelves and cabinets, as if in an attempt to burn down the house, but the house would not burn. One night, not feeling well, my grandmother had gone to bed a bit early, but couldn't seem to actually rest. Throughout the evening and late into the night, she heard running footsteps up and down the hallway, but did not get up to check due to her illness. The next morning, she mentioned to my oldest aunt that they had been up very late, running up and down the hall and making noise. To which my aunt responded, "That wasn't us, Mama. Those noises happen almost every night." On another night, my grandmother heard a loud clunk in the hallway after my grandfather had gotten up to use the bathroom. She went into the hall to see what was going on and found an old electric space heater, which had been sitting on a table near the bathroom door, was now placed in front of the bathroom doorway, such that my grandfather would have tripped over it and fallen over it on his way out. The rest of the house was still asleep. One final story from my grandmother, which took place years later, was a period of time where she loved to have seances and would include my aunts and uncles as often as not. My father was dating my mother at the time and was also in attendance. During this particular seance, they claimed to have actually summoned the spirit of a Native American warrior, which possessed my father. I don't remember all the details, but they had a very difficult time exorcising this spirit from my father, and this would be the last seance my grandmother ever attempted. Interestingly, while the other attendees backed up my grandmother's story, my father vehemently denies to this day that this ever happened. Moving ahead, I would like to relate some of the experiences my mother had. My mother was also referred to as gifted spiritually, but I don't believe she enjoyed talking about the experiences in the same way my grandmother did. Curiously, at a point in our lives where my father was working through several jobs, my parents moved us into a house that happened to be directly across the street from the house in the previous stories. This house was not great. Because the foundation was settling, there were only 2 level floors in the entire house, the dining room and the tiny kitchen. Every other room had anywhere from a 1 to 3% slope. The settling was bad enough that some of the walls were starting to separate in the corners, and in one corner of the living room you could see daylight through the crack. We spent a very uncomfortable winter in that house. I don't remember any feelings of dread or foreboding personally, but my mother had several experiences there. A set of French doors separated the living room from the dining room, although I don't remember them ever being completely closed when we lived there. Once my mother saw very clearly through the closed half a Civil War soldier sitting at our dining room table. They didn't interact, and he had vanished when she actually came through the open side and into the room. In another instance, verified as well as I can with my sister, my mother heard crying from the back of the house where my sibling's room was. She went back to check thinking it was my sister, but instead found an unfamiliar little girl. Realizing that this was a spirit, my mother tried to comfort her, but the girl responded, "I'm not crying for me, I'm crying for you. You have to get out of this house." I believe that warning had to do with another spirit that I can just remember my mother speaking of, a very dark, violent spirit. I don't remember if they spoke or if it was just the feeling she got from it, but the family moved to a different house not too long after. I had a few experiences myself over the years. When I was a freshman in high school, one night when the family was watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries about paranormal events, one of my brothers and I had a very weird experience. We were heading to bed, and we entered the bedroom. As we entered the bedroom, my old clock radio went off. Now, I know it's possible to set an alarm and forget it, or to do it incorrectly, but this was different. This was a clock radio from the early mid-'80s, and it was completely analog. As the clock went off, it started scanning through the radio stations, which it was unable to do automatically since the radio was controlled by a manual knob on the side. I immediately unplugged it, wrapped the cord around it, and shoved it deep into the closet. It remained stuffed in the closet until we moved. Another experience I had occurred at the home of one of my aunts. We pretty much visited our cousins every summer during the holidays, and I was familiar with what this house sounded like in almost any weather or season. During one visit, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room, and I woke up early, as I often did in those days. It was that time of the morning when it's still dark, but you can just start to make out details instead of shadows, and you know the sun will be up fairly soon. As I was lying there, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. I assumed that this would be my uncle getting up for work. Since it would be rude to just lay there and pretend to sleep, I sat up to wish him a good morning as the footsteps reached the end of the couch. But there was no one there. The footsteps, however, did not stop. They moved past the couch, through the dining nook, and into the kitchen. Being the very mature late teen that I was, I laid back down, covered my head with the blanket, and did not move again until the sun was well and truly up. Don't remember any more truly paranormal experiences until much later, in a house in California that my wife and family and I were living in. A friend of my stepdaughter was visiting, and we were all sitting in the living room talking. I was on the couch which faced the entryway in front hall, while my stepdaughter's friend sat in my wife's usual chair, which was side on to the hallway. While we were talking, a dark, head-shaped object appeared around the corner of the hallway at what would have been about a height of 6'7" or 6'8". At the time I saw this shape, my stepdaughter's friend caught it in her peripheral vision because her head snapped around to look in that direction at the same time. It was gone by the time either of us were able to focus on the area. I was the tallest person in the house at the time at 6'2", and everyone but my young daughter were in the living room. Same house, but a number of years later, I decided to head to bed, but my wife was staying up for a while. She struggled with insomnia for years. I went and laid down, but couldn't seem to go to sleep. Sometime later, I felt the movement of air by the bed that generally indicates her walking by, and I felt her get into the bed and adjust the covers. I was beginning to get uncomfortable from laying on my right side for so long, so I rolled over, only to find the other side of the bed empty. I quickly got up and went to the living room where my wife was sitting in her chair. She had not been in the bedroom all evening. This particular experience repeated itself several times, although generally months apart. And there you have it for now, a small trip through some of the stories and encounters that make up my experiences with the paranormal. Hope you enjoyed them. Feel free to like, comment, question, subscribe should you feel the mood strike you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you all have a safe and happy Halloween.